All right, welcome back to the Ottawa studios of Inside My Canoe Head. We are here today to wrap up Season 10, talk about what we did, what went well, what didn't go well, and to set you up for Season 11. So sit back, grab yourself your favorite beverage. Let's get at her. All right, welcome back, and thanks again for everybody who continues to join us on the show and all of your new followers. Thanks for choosing us out of the myriad and the absolute melange of podcasts out there. We appreciate your support. Follow us over at www.insidemycanoehead.ca, and here we go. Season 10 by far was the most productive, the most followed, and the most downloaded season in the history of Inside My Canoe Head. And that's not just because it's the last one, right? Season 9 was not the biggest before Season 10, and in fact, Season 8 was the largest. We had a slight downturn in followership and downloads for Season 9, and Season 10 brought it back up to and past the level of Season 8. So we appreciate you continuing to listen to the podcast, but Season 10 had a very specific, practical focus. That was our job. That was our role. That's why we were here, to try to translate a lot of the theory and ideas that we talked about in Season 8, a bit of 7, 8, and 9, and moving it into, okay, so what? That sounds good as an idea, but what the hell does that mean for me on a day-to-day basis? Like, what is the practical implication of X? You know, theoretical ideas about strategic planning are great and they sound wonderful on a podcast, but how does that help me with my budgeting? How does that help me worry about what happens when the power goes out next time? How does it help me understanding how I insulate myself from economic chaos when I lose my job? That kind of thing, right? So we practically did that in Season 10. So today we're going to do a bit of a historical rollback, talk about the principal ideas. So this is your summative episode. This is all of the ideas talked about in the approximately 20 episodes that encompass Season 10, all in one shot. So grab yourself your favorite beverage if you have not already. Sit back, put your feet up, but do pay attention to the road if you're driving, and here we go. Word salad. Definitions matter. When we talk about things, for example, when you look in the political sphere, and it's very important, people do this all the time, right? You hear right-wing, left-wing, centrist, xenophobic, all these words that you hear thrown around. But when you actually sit people down and corner them and say, what do you mean about this? What does this mean for you? And then how does that differentiate from something else? You start to see there's actually a pretty broad understanding and belief in the words. And I don't want to say it's a misunderstanding. You think this is, you know, X, Y, Z. And when we talked about the first episode, we talked about mitigation, preparedness, and resilience. How those three things are distinctly separate individual things. They are interrelated. Several of them help the other, but what are they? And what we try to do is to say, hey, listen, when I talk about mitigation, this is what we're worried about, right? I'm not trying to educate you on this is the definition, right? That's a level of arrogance we don't have here. It's about framing the understanding that when I talk about preparedness, it's the totality of the physical actions and the cognitive decisions you make to set yourself up to be ready to navigate things from which are beyond your control, but they influence your life, right? Things happen. The vast majority of things that go wrong in your life were not because of decisions you made, right? There's always a few dumb things we all do. But the reality is life happens around you. The world churns and ridiculous things occur, and it impacts you. Preparedness are all of those things that you do pre-event, right? Preparedness is all about pre-event. Once the event happened, preparedness doesn't exist anymore, right? Preparedness is all about all of the stuff you do pre-event, cognitive and physical, so that when a shock happens, something comes out of right field, punches you upside of the head, bam, right? You're ready to go. And resilience is a state of which you contribute to resilience by contributing through mitigation and preparedness, right? You build resilience through other external actions. You don't directly build resilience. So anyhow, it's just important to do that because we live in a period of political turmoil, right? Let's be honest. And this was the second episode, and I thought this was one of my most favorite ones, to talk about the fact that we live in a right-wing, left-wing, communist, fascist ism society of everybody's accusing everybody of being something else. But then when you actually sit people down and ask them, listen, do you actually know what the definition of fascism is? And most of the time, for example, a lot of people will accuse right-wing parties of being fascist when in fact right-wing parties try to fight fascism on a regular basis, right? But people have this view, they see an evil or something they believe to be evil, so they look back in history at all the evil things and call that thing it, right? So people will call governments they disagree with fascist, when in fact they very well may be fighting fascism tooth and nail, but because fascism is viewed as bad and evil, and I view you as bad and evil, they use that simple relationship to call you something, right? We've had it not just in political turmoil, but political turmoil is pretty impressive. And as I record this here on the 5th of July, you realize that, the UK woke up this morning to the largest landslide victory by the Labour Party since 1832. The largest landslide, a super majority, an absolute arse kicking, as we would say on the East Coast, right? It's going to be a different world in the UK. They chose this. Governments expire, governments get tired, and governments get thrown out. We're going to do that soon in Canada, whether you agree with it or not. Frankly, nobody cares whether you agree with it or not. We're going to toss out a government, right? Because Canadians don't traditionally elect governments. We throw them out. And we take the next offering on the table and we give it a run for 8 to 10 years, and we'll then throw that one out and bring the other guy back. This is just how we rinse and repeat in politics, right? But if you're somebody who believes in small government, if you're somebody who believes in very little regulation in the world, if you're in the UK, you just are entering probably a decade of a heavily involved, invasive regulatory government. Now, you may love that, but if you don't love that, that is going to impact your job. Now, you can pound salt and panic and act like a child and say this is a horrible thing, or you can get up and get on with it. How do I navigate the political turmoil that's beyond my control? How do I continue to chase my dreams? How do I continue to succeed? Great episode on that. But part of that issue is also understanding information, finding trusted information. And in episode 3, we talked about the fact that journalism is struggling, right? Let's be honest. Journalism is struggling. It is hard to understand which sources out there are providing trusted information and not misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation is simply when you spread something and say something that is not true, but you are not aware that it's true. So there's no malicious intent. You're spreading something likely somebody else has said. That fact is in fact not accurate, but you're spreading it. You just don't know you're not. So you're doing something dumb, but innocently dumb. Disinformation is when you are intentionally spreading a piece of information that you know to be false, but you spread it anyhow, right? And most surveys that are done, most research, most surveys that you see, we know there is a lack of or a falling trust in government. And on average, it's about a plurality now, which is about 50-50. Some jurisdictions, there's a higher level of trust in government. Some jurisdictions, there's a lower level of trust in government. But we know overall the trending in general is downward, right? So how do you, and journalism is far worse, right? Far less than 50% of the population will find a trusted source in a modern journalistic legacy media outlet, right? The point is really, when the shizzy hits the fizzy, when bad day comes, where do you go to get trusted information? And is journalism one of them? And if so, what are your standards for that, right? Very important. Episode 4 was a big thing for me because I wanted to talk about my story. At some point on this podcast, I got to speak up and talk about my hard choice to change, where I was in life, and the difficult, challenging decisions that I had to face to change. And this was big for me to put out there because not a lot of people are, and I'm not comfortable all the time, in talking about my story and the struggles that I've had to try to figure out what the world looks like for me and how to take responsibility for it and how to change. And we had a later episode that I'll link with this now. It's further on in the year, a couple episodes later, when I came back and realized I really wanted to frame it slightly differently. And this episode was entitled How I Changed My Future Path, Becoming a Veteran, right? When you're a member of the armed services, very much of your life is planned. Your next position, the job you do, your duties, requirements, and expectations are all managed by somebody else. You have to meet a standard somebody else says, and you can't influence that standard, right? So it's very much a followers and leaders episode. It's very much that type of relationship, but it's very predictable, right? And once you've been in the mob, as we call it, for 5 or 10 years, you know how the entire system navigates. You feel very comfortable. And this is why a lot of veterans have such a challenge when we exit the military and enter. We don't understand your environment. We don't understand the general public. We don't know why it is the way it is. We don't know why people are the way they are. You all do crazy things. You act differently. You speak differently. You behave differently. You stand in line differently. And you do everything that is different from the way we've done it. I did it for 28 years a certain way. And then I had to join the civvy world. Like, for example, medical, right? When I was sick or needed a doctor, right, and you didn't go unless you were really sick, because if you just kept going to the doctor when you felt ill, you were weak and you were spineless and you were a pathetic, we used to call it an MIR commando, and medical inspection room is what the place you went to. I would just go over there and see a doctor. I didn't care what doctor it was. I just walked in, first come, first served by a doctor, got my whatever done, and left, right? Apparently now I got to find a family doctor. Apparently I got a roster on a family doctor. Apparently there's a whole bunch of things. What do you mean I can't just go see the specialist tomorrow? What do you mean I'll just drive down to the main hospital and see the specialist? What do you mean I got to wait 6 months for a specialist? I had to wait 9.5 months personally for a CT scan, right? They did the CT scan. They found something pretty significant that needed to be dealt with right away. 3 days later, I was in for the second one, right? What do you mean 9 months? I got an issue. We're solving this today. I'm walking down the hall to the CT. I didn't ask you permission. That's what I'm doing, right? That world doesn't exist, and it's really tough to do that. So a bit of a break from the season, but I needed to stick it out there, and it was the right time, right? And then we live in this crazy world. And I had to do an episode on how to understand risk, right? So how do you perceive risk in the world? And each one of us are different, right? We all have friends that are across this spectrum, right? When do you like to be the person who has everything planned out? You think of absolutely everything could go wrong and you plan for everything? Or are you somebody that gets up in the morning, grabs your coffee, heads out and see what happens, right? Will you bungee jump? Or you're like, no way, there's so many possibilities for injury or breakage. There's such a small percentage, but still not zero. I'm not doing this. Like, everybody has a different risk tolerance. We call it your risk profile, right? So your risk tolerance, your self-efficacy, your self-confidence, your attitude about accepting danger all makes each one of us different in our ability and our desire to assume certain levels of risk. Risk level is never zero, but we assume different levels of risk with a level of comfort, right? What is your risk comfort level? Everybody's going to be different, and that informs what activities you do, or if you do an activity, how you approach it and how you plan for it. It's very, very important in this chaotic world to understand that if you have 10 people in a room, they're going to look at a significant event from a different perspective, right? And your perspective is different than the person standing next to you, but theirs is not wrong, incorrect, weak, or strong. It's because we all have a different risk profile, right? Very, very important. And when you go through the steps of understanding how to build that risk personal profile, and you start to realize, hey, listen, I'm not crazy, I'm not weird. This is who I am. It's really cool. I love myself. This is how I approach risk. And that informs so much more of what you do. It doesn't limit what you do, but it informs how you approach things, right? It's very, very important, and I think it's incredible. We then moved on to some pretty fun episodes. First one was entrepreneurship and emergency management. I'm an entrepreneur, right? So I wanted to talk about the idea that innovation and disruption does not happen in the public service, right? I worked in the military for 28 years and 5 or 7 of those years were at the strategic level in cubicles working with some pretty senior public servants, right? Innovation and disruption does not happen in the public service. Dramatic changes does not happen. what they do is they work at the margins, right? It's a political policy. It's a political theory called incrementalism in historical institutionalism. And when you put the two of those together, you realize that our public sector agencies work very, very slowly, and they make changes at the margins, which means they'll change slight over time, little by little, slight portions of their policy, right? But in today's world, we know that innovation and disruption is how we're going to find new and interesting ways. And if this is something you want, if you want to be an entrepreneur and you want to try to make tens of thousands of dollars per month, side hustle income, and eventually make six figures a month in emergency management, you're not going to do that at a salaried position. So you ask yourself, if I'm looking for a salary of somewhere between $1.5 to $2.5 million a year in gross income, you can't get that in emergency management. Not the senior person in FEMA makes over $1 million a year. You have to be an entrepreneur, and in an entrepreneurial space means you are solving problems that exist for real people, right? So when you look at emergency management, like any other field, you look at the areas, what systemic significant problems are people facing that they're not able to solve, and you solve those, and then you solve it in a way and then create a solution that is deliverable for them and addresses that problem, and then you sell it to them, right? It's called innovation and disruption, entrepreneurship, and emergency management. And you can literally translate that to anything you do. If you're a welder, if you're a coal miner, if you're a tradesperson, if you're an accountant, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. The idea of innovation and disruption and entrepreneurship means, you know what, I'm going to carry on being a carpenter. And how many times have you seen this online where you see those really cool tools that are invented by people who do the job, and there's no tool to do something you want, right? So what do? You create the tool. It's like the individual, I don't know if you've seen it, but he's made these metal brackets for for American standard lumber, which is 2x4, 2x6. It's not really 2 inches, but you know what I mean, to put 12 inches and 16 inches on center. So there's no more measuring boards, right? You put this metal frame down on top, and you right on top of the boards, and they're automatically inches apart, and there's drill holes in the bottom. So bing, 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 bing. So you're literally, in the time it takes a person to measure and put the X's for the 12 and 16 inches on center, you're already done the wall and you're on to the next one. It takes a carpenter to do that. That's entrepreneurship. They see a problem. They see a better, more efficient way to do something that still has to be done, and they invent the problem, they invent the solution, they create it, they market it, and bam, the individual who made that thing is likely making, 6-7 figures a year, if not a month, on top of their carpenter salary, and they're probably not a carpenter anymore. So it's a pretty cool idea out there. We then wanted to take the discussion about preparedness a little bit deeper, and we wanted to talk about beyond disasters. And preparedness, the first 20% of preparedness is the traditional things that we all understand. That's what we talk about in book Preparedness 1, book 1, Preparedness Simplified, and in our online video course in the first chapters that are out. We talk about the steps you take to take command and control and responsibility for your outcomes and ensure that you, your family, and to some degree your community are ready to deal with those things that are beyond your control, right? That's the preparedness everybody basically understands. Evacuations, power outages, disruptions, floods, tornadoes, earthquakes, hurricanes. Those are the type of things that people traditionally see as preparedness. That's the first 20%. The other 80% is preparedness beyond disasters. And the first gate that we use to open that, to demonstrate this to people and clients and people that I work with, is income loss, right? You losing your family's primary source of income is just as impactful as your house burning down, especially if you're a single income household. You live in a house, you have a the standard nuclear wonderful family, or however you have an extended family, several generations, brothers. It doesn't matter what your family looks like, but your main primary source of income goes away tomorrow. What are you going to do? Now, you might be an absolute fantastic employee doing great things for a really healthy company. Well, guess what? A pandemic came along and shut all that down. What was your plan to continue earning income. What if last night when you went to bed, while you were sleeping, your place of business burned down on a fire? You're a great employee. Your company was healthy. You were doing wonderful work. And you get a text in the morning saying, sorry, right now, the building is burned down and we don't know when we'll restart. You have no salary. What are you going to do? That is preparedness just as much as getting ready for a hurricane, right? Absolutely, without question. People see that and they have that aha moment. And then they realize that preparedness is about so much more than the basics. Now, I anchor it in the basics. If you don't do the basics first, you're going to be successful in the long run. Or if you are, it will be far more difficult. But the answer to it is we start looking at preparedness beyond disasters and then your planning options. How do I figure out to navigate the future, right? What does strategy look like? How do I understand what I'm trying to achieve? And this is when you start getting into strategic frameworks. We start asking ourselves, okay, I'm prepared. My family's ready for what we consider natural disasters and natural type emergencies that could happen. What am I after? Like, what is your plan, right? In today's society, if you want to be successful, there's very little you have to do because most of society now is just on a turn and burn. Their victim ideology, they're blaming everybody else for their personal situation and they don't accept personal responsibility. Everything's happening to them and it's not their fault, right? We see it everywhere. We see it in every publication. We see it all over the place. Everybody's a victim. Now, if you want to be uber successful in life, you just have to cross that threshold. It's not that difficult, but how do you do that? And this is where preparedness steps into strategic thinking, right? When we start saying, where do I want to be in a year? Where do I want to be in 3, 5, 10 years, right? What am I after? A great quote from an old friend of mine, he's since passed, but a great mentor of mine, said there's two types of people. One person, the first person swings their legs out of bed in the morning, looking forward to what the day has and chasing very specific ideas and dreams, and they're going to spend time with the people they love, doing the things they love. The second person doesn't. It's that simple. Which one do you want to be? Do you want to swing your legs out of bed in the morning with a very specific target that you're after, surrounded by people who you love, doing things that you love, supporting people that you love, and having the ability to take care of yourself and everybody for whom you're responsible, right? Or not? That's a choice you have to make, but that's a choice you make. And then you make a strategy and you make a plan. And we talk very much about that. And as a forward thinking, we're at the end of July, we're going to release the strategy module for our video course. Now, the first part of the video course right now, it's available at preparednesslabs.ca. All the links are there. It's $129 Canadian. And what it offers is that first 20% of preparedness, a video course on how to do this with an accompanying workbook. We're adding the next module is coming out in July. It's going to be the strategic thinking. So then now that I've got the preparedness piece, the simple basic preparedness, but important. Now, how do I move that into strategy? How do I think about, how do I build my life so that I'm after and chasing what I want? And irrespective of everything that's happening around me, all the exogenous shocks, political, economic, influenza, bird flu, whatever's coming down the pipe next, you are insulated and protected and continuing to pursue your dreams. This is something I'm very passionate about. We've researched it for over a year and a half, and I'm going to present to you the strategy that worked for me, and with a few kind of slight changes that are based upon some latest research that have come out. So that's coming out at the end of this month. Look for it. There'll be lots of announcements. And if you want to stay tuned with everything that we're doing here at Inside My Canoe Head and Preparedness Labs Incorporated, our parent company, drop over to preparednesslabs.ca, and there is a newsletter to you sign up for, free of charge, comes out every Thursday. And basically it has all our latest ideas of what we're doing in the business, what the podcast's up to. But on top of that, some really great ideas and some conversation about what's happening in the world. So that's there. Sign up for it. I think you'll very much enjoy that. There's also a couple of free downloads over on our website where you don't have to give me your email. You just have access to what we offer free of charge, and you can see everything that Preparedness Labs has to offer. So with that, we're going to move on and talk about some more preparedness exercises and adventure. Listen, some people always, I don't know if you ever heard this ad, right? People talk about the 72-hour kits, the bug-out bags, the go bags, whatever you want to call it. You see a lot of this in the United States of America, especially on YouTube and the apocalyptic end of society type channels. And they talk about exercising, the need to practice, right? If you're going to throw all this stuff into a backpack and you think you're going to survive out of it forever and ever, amen, or for 72 hours or whatever, some advocate actually, shutting off your power and trying to figure out how to do it. Come on, we let's be realistic about it, but exercises are beneficial. And the most valuable one in my sense is always the tabletop exercise, right? And I think a TTX, as we refer to it in the business, in the military and emergency management, is far more valuable than the major big exercises. The reason is you talk through it. When you set up a TTX, you talk through all of the issues, and people have to put inputs, and then the exercise controllers will submit various inputs to throw you a curveball as the exercise evolves, and then they'll watch and they'll manage and they'll talk through issues, etc. When you think about your family, talking about how your family plans to execute an evacuation is what you need to do. You don't have to throw everything in bags and run out to the car to practice. You're missing the point. What you want people to be able to do in a situation is understand what their responsibilities are and be able to execute those responsibilities without having to be told to do A, then B, then C, then D. This is the point of a TTX, right? It's the point of an exercise. Everybody understands what their role is. Everybody knows what to do. And I talk about this now. When there's an emergency situation in the city I live in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, everybody in my family knows what to do. There is no need to text anybody. I don't need to communicate. I don't need cell phone. I don't need to call somebody. I don't need to do any of that because everybody knows what they're supposed to do. Everybody knows what their first action, their second action, their third action is. Everybody knows where they're supposed to be and where their alternate places are supposed to be, right? I don't need to talk to anybody. I don't need to communicate with my family members during an emergency because everybody understands what they're doing, right? That's what a TTX benefits for. So while everybody else is running around with chickens with their heads cut off, trying to figure out what the hell is going on around them, trying to source information about what is going on, you and your family members are executing a well-rehearsed plan. Everybody's calm. This is the key. People don't understand, and I think if you remember back to the last time you were surprised, stressed, and anxious, how jacked up your emotional state is and how few things you remember to do when everything is anxious and crazy around you. But when it's rehearsed, right? It's that old adage of people don't rise to the occasion, they fall to their level of training. This is why police SWAT teams and military special forces practice clearing a room 1,000 times so that when they have to clear the room in the middle of a high-speed, stressful environment, it's simply an execution of muscle memory and tasks, right? The same thing for your exercises and remembering what you plan to do, right? We then get into some great conversations about designing a simple life, right? And purposeful preparedness, and this is what we're trying to do in the strategic module, to come a bit back to that, is really about you're here for I don't know how long. What do you want to do? What do you want to achieve, right? It's personal responsibility. It's nobody else's responsibility to pay your bills. That's yours. It's nobody else's responsibility to give you promotions. That's yours. It's nobody else's responsibility to take care of you. That's yours, right? The first part of preparedness is accepting personal responsibility for your outcomes and everything that goes along with it. And if you're not willing to do that, listen, I wish you the best today, but you're on your own and best luck. If you think the government in any shape or form is going to come save you, I'm sorry, but there's no data or evidence to support that. Ideological feelings aside, that is incorrect. But fair enough, you're off you go. Have yourself a great time. Good luck. But the whole idea about designing a simple life is some people want to be 100 mile an hour, 16-hour, working a day, 7-day a week, entrepreneur with no work-life balance, driving her to try to earn $1 million, right? Other people want a wonderful work-life balance, right? If you want to work 6 to 8 hours, 5 days a week, and have weekends off and stuff, then you're going to have a great life and you're going to enjoy it. If somebody over here wants to work 115 hours a week to become a millionaire, then they're going to do that. Neither one of those answers is wrong and neither one of those answers is right. It's appropriate for you. What you cannot do then is get mad that Buddy earned $1 million and is driving a Bugatti and flying private and you're in a townhouse. Designing a simple life and planning for life strategy is just that. It is you figuring out what makes you happy, what you want to do, and laying out the roadmap to earn that, so that no matter what happens around you, no matter what the world tries to beat you up on a regular basis, dude, you're chasing your dreams. You're doing your thing. And as one famous comedian said, the meaning of life is simply enjoying the passage of time. That's it, right? So what do you want to do while you're here? We had some great interviews on this interview with Chris Livham, who from a contract firefighter, to talk about wildfire firefighting and the role of the private sector in emergency management, which I think is so underutilized. We had a conversation with Janet from Natural Disaster Solutions. Survival products, fantastic about all the products that she has in the world. And the problem she's trying to address through the provision of supplies to help people navigate their world. And I think those 2 episodes were really, really important, and they did very, very well in the downloads. But they're very important to frame the discussion about all of community, right? And we had a couple of episodes about community preparedness, and it's about when we talk about whole of community approach to preparedness, we actually mean the whole of community. And I've got some, if you're in Ottawa in September, I'm giving a presentation at the Canadian Emergency Preparedness and Climate Adaptation Conference in Ottawa. I'm on the board of directors, or the governing body, for that as well. And then I'm giving a similar presentation in the fall in the Disaster Forum Conference in Banff, Alberta, about whole of community approach. And I'm doing this with a very good friend of mine, Scott Cameron, who's the founder of Emergency Management Logistics Canada. And we're talking about the fact that actually it does require the public sector. It requires the private sector and corporations to be involved. It requires the individuals. It requires the community organizations. And it requires all of the structural networks and the value of social capital to be successful in navigating shocks that are beyond your control, right? It really does take all of us, and that's everybody, which means the role of the private sector companies is just as important as the role of Emergency Management Ontario, right? The government's emergency management organization is just as important as the companies. One is not more important than the other. They both have a role to play, as does your community organizations, your faith-based organizations, your service organizations, as does your neighborhood organizations. All of that together provides a whole of community preparedness response that is necessary, because it's all about what I've said in one episode. Preparedness is the art of placing order into chaos. That doesn't mean it's your responsibility to fix the world. It means that you are placing order into a chaotic situation you did not start, and you do not have an influence over when it ends. But while it's occurring, you want to make sure that you are navigating it in an orderly and safe fashion, and you're continually be able to do. And I'll give a prime example of this, right? I run an online business. I need to be online 24/7 for my business to be successful, right? So it doesn't matter if the power's out. I still need to be online. It doesn't matter if there's a fire, a flood. It doesn't matter if there's political disruption. It doesn't matter any of that. I still need to be online 24/7. So because of that, I've taken the preparedness measures that I'm online. I don't need power to run my internet from the government, right? I don't need the external power. I have sufficient power in my home, backup power systems where I can run my internet, run my modems, run my computer, run this podcast. I do all of that. Now, don't get me wrong. It is far easier and simpler when the government provides me power and I pay for it. But if for whatever reason it fails, it doesn't affect my ability to do my job, right? It doesn't affect my ability to protect the $600 worth of meat I have in the freezer, right? It's far easier when the government provides it for me, but preparedness means that doesn't affect me, right? That's the art of placing order into chaos. So I carry on my day as per normal. Even if I have to evacuate my home, my next day is absolutely normal because I have the ability to do whatever I need to do for life, dreams, hopes, all these things, wherever I may be. So being evacuated from my home for a period of 2 weeks does not cause everything to come to a grinding halt. It is disruptive, but it doesn't stop anything, right? I may lose a couple hours of productivity while I'm driving from A to B, but then everything jumps right back into normalcy again. Why? Because I have a strategic plan, because I have strategic thinking, because I have a preparedness plan for my family, right? Because beyond sheltering in place, I can do this wherever the heck I want, right? Evacuations are the most impactful. Traffic jams don't need to happen. That's an episode that I had a lot of fun with, to really look at why everything seems so chaotic in an evacuation and it doesn't need to be, and why it's one of our 3 trifecta of preparedness plans in the book. We talk about it in seasons 6, 7, and 8, and we have a whole episode on it, a couple of episodes in our video course on the fact that evacuations can actually be very well planned, fairly simple, and close to zero stressful events if you think about it in advance. If you wait for the government to spastically tell you it's time to run and then randomly run around and try to solve the issue, then you've set yourself up for failure. The government is what it is, right? It's your job to take control of that. So last 2 episodes I want to talk about here on a season 10 review is, do titles matter? Hi, I'm Jeff, the backcountry paddler. And the reason we say that is a lot of times the cultural ideology is we have tied our role, responsibility, and to some degree value and position in society to the professional goals or roles that we fill, right? When I was in the military, I was Major D, right? It was my rank. I was a supply chain management officer specializing in demand sensing and a few other specialties, but I was Major D. I mean, my position that I was filling and the rank that I was afforded defined who I was. You know, that's who I was. When somebody asked my name, they wanted to know my rank as well. We'd see that across in the civilian world, right? I'm a plumber. I'm a carpenter. I'm a this. But if you had to take all that away, if you introduced yourself to somebody from what your passion was, what you really get excited about, right? For me, it's backcountry paddling. That's it. That's my biggest kick in the world, right? More important to me than podcasting, more important to me right up, but not more important than my family. But as an individual human being, my passion is a backcountry paddler, right? I love to be far away from civilization, way back in Canada's north, paddling rivers, camping on the side of the road, interacting on the side of the river, interacting with the wildlife, whatever it may be. I just love to be out there where there's no cell signal, on your own, using your tools, your skill sets. It's a beautiful place to be, right? I would introduce myself to say, hi, I'm Jeff, the backcountry paddler. How are you? I have a PhD. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a part-time professor. I'm an author. I'm a podcaster. Sure, all of that's great. But guess what? I'm the backcountry paddler. So we ask people to think about how you would label yourself and introduce yourself if you weren't trying to follow the pre-existing cultural norms, right? What would you call yourself? And we finished off the year with a trust in communications episode, right? What is your trust in government communications? And it goes right back to what we talked about for finding the journalistic struggles early on, is that in the plurality and the trust in government is going down. Decisions that were made during the pandemic, information that was passed. And I had this debate with somebody on the internet, and they just kind of stopped because, I don't know, whether they didn't like what I said or they were tired or had something else more important to do. But the point being is that everybody during the pandemic was responsible for disinformation and misinformation, right? There were parts of the government, including public health officials and government elected politicians, who intentionally spread incorrect facts. Everybody did it, right? Every level of government and every public health agency I know intentionally spread facts that were incorrect. They also spread very good information and stuff that was very important for people to understand and very important for people to take uphold and help to make an informed decision. Because we have to remember in trust and communications is that, and this is a huge piece of the research I did for my PhD, is that people turn to trusted sources in times of an emergency, and government officials cannot assume that they are a trusted source simply because they have a position and title, right? And I make the joke on emergency management all the time because you see them with their cute crested polos, right? Just because you have a crested polo doesn't mean people will pay attention to you. People turn to trusted sources. People determine what a trusted source is for different avenues, but the general thing is the two things that are required to be a trusted source. One, you have had to have provided value and accurate information in the past that was deemed to be important and useful. And the second thing is you need to be consistent with your message and stay on point, right? You say something, popular or not, you say the truth and you provide guidance and information to people, you become a trusted source. That's generally how it works. And a lot of agencies did not stay the course, right? I would say it's probably 80% trusted, 20% disinformation for public health during the pandemic. But the problem is that 20% disinformation that they did intentionally release has now placed them in a difficult position. So imagine if the bird flu did become the next pandemic, right? There's going to be a significant portion of the population who is going to, number one, ignore that message simply because they've lost trust in public health. But the second part, even if they do have trust in public health, they're going to pause for a second and ask, what is the intent? What is the motivation behind public health? What are they trying to do? Why? Because we used to believe that public health was a separate and distinct entity from political. We saw especially in the United States government, less so in our local government here. We've got an incredible public health agency here in Ottawa, the city that I live in, but in the federal U.S. government, we saw that their public health agencies became a political arm. They spread information based upon the wishes of their political masters, not necessarily based upon the latest information and general understanding of the situation. And because of that, now the very day, and this is what I've said in the past, what I fear next, what I fear the most in coming an event is when we have another contagion, and we will, right? Because of our interconnectedness and because of the way we work and because of gain of function research and a bunch of other things that people are doing, there is a high likelihood we'll have another one. The problem, what I fear the most is that the lack of trust in government institutions is going to cause a plurality or a significant minority of the population to simply not follow government instructions and advice because they don't believe that the government institution has their best interest at heart, right? So when we need people to do things very specifically to keep the collective society safe, people are not going to follow it because they no longer believe. And right now, what I am not seeing, and I advocate for this endlessly, is I am not seeing government institutions attempting to rebuild trust with the population. They are just carrying on as if they remain trusted sources in the public. They're just carrying. Nobody has gone back, rehashed, and looked at what happened during the pandemic. They've just wiped it as a bad part of history, and they're moving on. The problem is that's not how you build trust. There is no evidence and research to back up the fact that if you just ignore follies of the past and expect people to begin trusting you and continue to trust you, that will work. It doesn't exist. So hopefully season 10 was worthwhile. Hopefully somewhere in that melange of almost 20 episodes, you found a nugget of value for you and your family. We always are looking for feedback here at Inside My Canoe Head. If you drop over to our website, www.insidemycanoehead.ca, because we're Canadian, there is a form at the bottom that you can click on, and you can send me an email directly to me. Comes to me, not a staff. That one does not have a staff filter on it. So it comes directly to me. I will answer you directly. Things you like, things you dislike, things you want to hear about. That's how we stay relevant. That's how we continue to grow. 50 plus countries, 5 figures of downloads. We are here for the long run. Free information for you about preparedness and rocking an incredible life and chasing your dreams. So thanks again for joining us as we close out season 10. Season 11 is coming around the corner. Look out. We are going to have some real fun with this one. So take care, stay safe, and enjoy the summer.